Welcome back to the show where we turn the messiness of business and life into powerful learning moments. I'm your host, Kerri Roberts, and today we're diving into a topic that is absolutely essential for any business owner, and that's legal compliance in human resources. As someone who's been in HR and operations for over 20 years, I can tell you that staying on top of legal requirements isn't just about keeping your company out of trouble. It's about building a culture of fairness, transparency, and trust. Whether you're a small business just getting your HR foundation in place, or a growing company navigating the complexities of compliance, today's episode is packed with best practices that will help you safeguard your business and empower your workforce. From staying updated on ever-changing employment laws to creating airtight documentation and delivering effective employee training, we're covering 7 best practices that you can make or use it to break your HR department. So if you're ready to turn potential chaos into compliance, stay tuned as we dig into the crucial steps you can take to protect your business while fostering a healthy work environment. Let's get into it. Here are my 7 best practices for legal compliance in HR. Number 1, we need you to stay updated on employment laws and regulations. HR pros and business owners must regularly stay informed about changes in federal, state, and local employment laws. This includes regulations related to wage and hour laws, anti-discrimination policies, workplace safety, such as OSHA, you might have heard of that, OSHA, family and medical leave, you might have heard of FMLA or FMLA, and employee classification under the Fair Labor Standards Act, you might have heard it called FLSA. We recommend that you subscribe to legal updates, attend HR compliance seminars, and maintain connections with legal counsel for timely advice on evolving laws. Second thing to follow when it comes to HR best practices is creating comprehensive, compliant employment policies. Second best practice when it comes to HR compliance is creating comprehensive, compliant employment policies. A well-drafted employee handbook and set of policies is essential for establishing compliant workplace procedures. These should cover areas such as anti-discrimination, harassment, health and safety, leave policies, confidentiality, and disciplinary actions. We recommend you regularly review and update employment policies to ensure they align with current legal standards and distribute updated versions to employees with proper acknowledgement forms. So let's say you pulled down a template that you found online, which is perfectly fine. It's okay to ask ChatGPT, OpenAI, Claude, any of those to write a handbook for you these days. I totally get it. The risk in that is it's not totally relevant to your business. So if you're going to throw this into OpenAI, here's what I'd recommend you do. I would say, Claude or whatever your system is, we are let's say, interior and exterior construction company with around 38 employees located in the state of Missouri, not operating in any other states. Please write us an employee handbook, including, X, Y, and Z to ensure that we are legally compliant. Now, it's going to spit you out something and it's going to be an excellent start, but we need to start with those precursory items. If you're just pulling this down offline, I can assure you, you're off base. There are some things in your business that you need to make sure are covered. Once you read that handbook, and I'm serious, you need to read it line by line. I understand it's not going to be the most titillating read you ever had, but you need to read it line by line. You need to make sure that you're covering your organization's PTO policies, your organization's wait times for employee benefits if you offer those, your organization's remote work policies, or if folks are driving vehicles, if they've got a fleet vehicle, you need to have policies involved in there. So take your template and then make sure it's customized. Then I would put something on the calendar. Every 6 months is probably best, maybe even once a quarter, but at a minimum, every year annually, you need to block off some time, probably with a few leaders in your organization, and go through this handbook. I know it's a beast, but this is the best thing that you can do. I'm giving best practices, you guys. This is the best thing you can do to maintain HR compliance. Now, how are you going to know if laws have been updated? You need to see the first best practice, which is staying in the loop when it comes to changing HR regulations getting on those email lists, following HR compliance seminars, things like that. All right, third best practice idea is to ensure consistent documentation and record keeping. Accurate and consistent documentation is crucial for legal compliance and protection in case of audits or litigation. This includes maintaining employee records, performance reviews, disciplinary actions, leave documentation, and payroll records. I'd recommend that you implement a centralized, secure system for storing and maintaining HR records, ensuring confidentiality and easy access. So clear file storage names for compliance audits or legal investigations. Let me give you an example. I, at one point, had somebody who was not hired. We rejected them as a candidate, and they came back and said it was a discrimination issue. And so we had to then pull all of our candidate records. I'm talking every single resume, and essentially give compliance data on how many people of color, how many women, how many protected classes, how many people applied for each role, how it was that we posted for these roles, how often that we interviewed, how many candidates that we phone interviewed, how many candidates that we interviewed on site. It was a ton of information. Imagine if you didn't have a systematic approach to storing all that documentation. You probably would for the second time that it happened. Hopefully it would never happen again. But we definitely made sure that we dotted our I's and crossed our T's for the future, because that was a painful process. And of course, there were attorneys involved, so on and so forth. And while we won that case because it wasn't a discriminatory practice of why we rejected that candidate, there was a ton of information that came along with it. Do you know how long you need to keep your employee records? It depends on your state that you're operating in and a number of other, there's federal regulations on it, there's state regulations. And so making sure that this is a little bit more than just keeping a few pieces of paper in a drawer, making sure you've got an approach and that you understand your record keeping years and timelines. All of this is very important. Okay, the fourth area or best practice that I recommend is to conduct regular employee training. Employees should receive regular training on critical areas of the compliance. Ideas on these would be like anti-harassment, workplace safety, maybe some items around diversity, inclusion. So compliance training ensures that employees understand the laws that protect them and their own personal responsibilities within the workplace. I would recommend you schedule mandatory training sessions for employees and managers. And then at those sessions, I would track attendance, and I would offer refresher training annually to ensure continued awareness and compliance. Let me give you an example of how this has played out in the past. I have seen an organization not do annual sexual harassment training. So if you're not offering sexual harassment training, and let's say you've got a manager who sexually harasses an employee, technically, if you're not offering any training and you haven't had any policies signed off on, no acknowledgments, then that employee, if and when they do sue, they could tackle the employer versus just the individual who did the harassment, because the employer did not do their due diligence when it came to training and education. Now, if the employer has it in a policy, that policy has been signed off on, that employer has annual training, they had it upon hire, and they have annual refreshers, then I'm not saying that that employer is completely out of the woods, because, there's other things that go into play, like has this person ever been reported, was there documentation, so on and so forth. But you have a much higher chance of being protected as an employer, and then it would come back on that manager themselves personally when it comes to the liability. Okay, fifth best practice I recommend is to follow fair recruitment and hiring practices. Compliance starts with your hiring process. You need to ensure that your job descriptions, interview questions, and hiring practices are non-discriminatory and align with EEO regulations. That's equal employment opportunity. So in this, I'd recommend that you use structured interview guides and ensure job advertisements comply with EEO guidelines. If you don't know what those are, you need to Google that. Just in brief, you need to avoid questions related to age, race, gender, religion, and other protected characteristics. And if it would be helpful to you, we have hiring guides at Salt and Light Advisors that have a systematic approach that are tiered based off the level of the role in the organization, and they are consistent. It's got clear scoring, and it helps maintain that structure that gets away from potential discriminatory hiring practices, provides that systematic approach, and makes sure that we're not just hiring our friends or people who look, feel, and act like us. So if you need that, reach out. We also have a training course on that same content as well. 6th best practice I recommend when it comes to HR compliance is to implement fair wage and hour practices. Employers must comply with wage laws, including minimum wage, of course. We all know about that one. But what about when it comes to overtime pay, proper classification of employees? We've heard a ton of talk about this on the compliance front, whether you're classifying exempt versus non-exempt, contractor versus W-2. A ton goes into that. And I would say in general, most organizations are not doing it right. And under an audit, that employee, let's say that you've got somebody classified as exempt, which is salaried, and they really should be non-exempt. So that employee then during an audit would be able to guess, and I'm not saying they would be dishonest, but they would give their best guess at how many hours they've worked every week for the last, let's say, year. And then you're going to have to pay that on a lump sum, not to mention penalties and fees. And that's just one small example. So failure to adhere to these wage laws can result in costly penalties and lawsuits. So I recommend that you conduct periodic audits of wage and hour practices to ensure employees are being properly classified, compensated, and provided with regular breaks. And if you don't know how to do this, this one's a fairly easy project-based thing for a consultant to come in and do. Okay, 7th area of best practice I recommend for HR compliance would be to investigate and address employee complaints promptly. Not in a week, promptly. When employees raise concerns about workplace issues, including harassment, discrimination, potential safety violations, HR must investigate promptly and take appropriate action to resolve the issue. So I recommend on this to establish a clear process for employees to report complaints. That should probably live in your handbook. You need to ensure confidentiality during investigations and keep thorough documentation of how issues are addressed and resolved. Even if you don't have anyone sign anything, which I always recommend that you do have them sign and date. Even if you don't, let's say you just have a one-on-one conversation with someone, as soon as that meeting's over, just open up a Word document or open up an email, even if you're just emailing it to yourself. But if you've got HR people, you need to email it to them. Really, you need to have HR present in those conversations. But just drafting up a quick email that's got a time date stamp, that's going to help you should this issue continue and there's any kind of legal repercussions. By following these best practices, HR departments and business owners can mitigate legal risks, foster a compliant work environment, and protect both the company and your employees. Now, for a business owner without a full-time HR person, ensuring HR compliance can seem daunting, but it's achievable with a clear strategy. Let me give you a few quick additional tips that a business owner can take if you don't have an HR person who's focused on this, or let's say you've got a green HR person without the experience. The first thing I'd recommend is to outsource your HR expertise. And I recognize this is an easy one for me to say, but if you are focused in your business on delivering products or services to your clients, you don't have to be an HR professional. There are people that you can outsource this to. You can partner with a consultant or advisory firm like my business, Salt and Light Advisors, but there's a ton out there. You can partner with your HR payroll system. Your employee benefits broker might have some ideas. There's a ton of firms out there. You need someone to be managing your critical HR functions. This is not something that you can push off to the side of your desk and hope that you'll get to it, because let's be honest, you don't know what you're doing. So why not just delegate that? Outsourcing it gives you access to expert advice on compliance, policies, and best practices without the need for a full-time hire. Fractional is best, in my opinion, in this area. Okay, second thing you can do pretty quick is use HR software. I recommend investing in HR management software that can automate processes like payroll, time tracking, employee documentation, and compliance reporting. Many platforms also offer reminders for key compliance dates like tax filing and employee evaluations. So this is super helpful to you, all automated. Third quick thing you can do to stay updated on laws is to regularly review federal, state, and local employment laws. I'd recommend using resources like the United States Department of Labor's website and subscribe to newsletters or updates from legal or HR organizations that track labor law changes. You're welcome to hop onto mine. I put out an email every single Monday morning, and it's got HR legal updates. There's a ton of resources out there for this. Just get on one to stay updated with your information. Fourth tip is to create your clear policies. So we talked about this earlier, developing an employee handbook that includes those key policies. We're talking anti-discrimination, harassment, workplace safety, leave policies. You need to make sure it's updated annually to ensure that you're reflecting any legal changes. Fifth tip, just a reminder on that documentation, proper documentation is going to be essential for compliance. Keeping accurate records of employment contracts, performance reviews, disciplinary actions, employee hours, all of these need to be tracked, stored, and maintained for a number of years based on the state that you're operating in. Good documentation protects you in case of audits or legal disputes. We don't want to go down that path. You probably won't go down that path, but if you do, you've got to have all of this documentation. We talked about employee training, but even if you don't have a full HR team, you can still offer basic training on compliance topics like workplace harassment, safety protocols, and D&I, diversity and inclusion. These sessions can be led by an external expert. You can outsource this, or you can get this from online training modules. If you do have an HR payroll system, a lot of them have an add-on tool like a learning management system and LMS. A lot of times that's just an additional module you can tack on. And they even give you updates on what employees can and should be trained on every single year. You turn those modules on, it's rinse and repeat. Those employees get an email, they get a reminder, they get a prompt. They have to either take a quiz at the end or acknowledge the policy or the training. It's a great way to kind of set it and forget it somewhat. So use that HR automation to work in your benefit. Okay, seventh tip I've got is to conduct regular audits. So I would schedule, like I mentioned earlier, either the quarterly, the biannual, or the annual review of your handbook. I'd also recommend that you schedule periodic audits of your HR processes to ensure compliance with employment laws, payroll regulations, and benefits administration. You can hire an external auditor. Doing HR audits is something that my firm does regularly. A lot of HR firms do this. You can hire an external auditor, or you can work with an HR consultant to identify and address potential risks. And then last quick tip that I have, seems obvious. A lot of us say we do it, but we don't do it well. And that's maintaining an open door policy. Encourage open communication and create a culture where employees feel comfortable reporting issues or anything that makes them feel uncomfortable, or they can come to you with any questions that they have. This can help you address potential HR problems early before they escalate into legal challenges. By implementing these strategies, business owners can maintain HR compliance, protect their business from legal risks, and ensure a fair, productive workplace, even without a full-time HR person on staff. I know that work like this can feel chaotic. You don't even know what direction you're going. But I'll tell you, a lot of times I have clients come to me and they say, we want to outsource our HR compliance. And honestly, they don't even know what that means. They just know that they need something. Really, what you mean if you're saying that out loud is the list of things that I just said above. Some of those are very complicated and are legal driven. Some of them are just doing the right thing by people in a timely fashion. Either way, don't waste the chaos, embrace it. Either bring somebody in and have them focus on it, or contract with someone externally, but this work is worth it. Till next time.